just realizing like, oh, we're doing this thing together and we're in this together and like we're excited to figure it out together.
That was really refreshing to be in a situation where I didn't feel like I had to pretend like I had all the answers.
There was a sense of like childlike play. Did we all just become best friends?
Welcome to another Dreams of Education podcast with me, Kelly Tenkely, and my friend and co-host,
Michelle Baldwin.
So today, Michelle, we thought we would talk a little bit about how we did reading, how we approached reading at Anastasis. And one of the very first moments I remember really a shift happening for me with the way I thought about and approached curriculum happened actually within reading, because one of the students that I was teaching when I was a computer teacher came in one day and said she was bemoaning that they were reading Charlotte's Web. And I was just shocked because I thought, you're a kid who I would have guessed would love that book. And so I'm asking questions and she's telling me how much she hates it. And I said, well, what do you mean? You know, and I said, how far in are you? And she said, I don't know. It was in Treasures today, which was the curriculum that we used. Mm-hmm. And so when I was going through it and helping the teachers with the technology integration piece and trying to help, you know, bridge gaps and bring more life into that curriculum, I realized the reason she hated it is because it was an excerpt from chapter 3. She didn't ever get to read Charlotte's Web. They were all reading just this section of Charlotte's Web. And it's no wonder she didn't like it because she had no context for what was happening. There was no story there. It was literally reading this, you know, paragraph or two paragraphs. I think it was even maybe a full chapter of Charlotte's Web with no context about what the book was about, and then answering questions about it. And then we wonder why kids hate reading. So I remember that being a moment where I really started becoming disenfranchised with what the curriculum was doing and kind of this one-size-fits-all structure. And we often, as we were leading people through Anastasis, would hear, you know, how do you teach reading or what do you use to teach reading? And your answer was always?
At first I would say, well, I don't. And then I'd get the stares. And what I meant was I don't teach reading in the way that we were all taught to teach reading, because I feel like I'm going to probably anger a lot of educators here. Maybe not. I think the science of reading has really taken over the art and joy of reading. Mm-hmm. And that's when you get kids excited about books, you can teach them anything and everything, right? Yeah. When it's an excerpt from a book that is maybe we're focusing on theme today and you're reading, 3 paragraphs from an actual book. Like you said, you have no context. And what we know about kids is that when they are reading books, they are either looking into mirrors, they are looking out windows, they are walking through doors, they're immersing themselves in different worlds. And that's how you start to build the structure for a reader. It cannot be read these 3 paragraphs and tell me what the setting is. No, again, who cares, right? And it makes me so sad that that's what reading has been drilled down into, just the very basics. Again, rather than looking at why does an individual read, what needs do they have? And that's different for every single kid. So when we look at that, you have to know your kids. You have to be a good curator for your kids when it comes to reading. And the fact that they have choice, again, I can take any book and I can teach kids how to read from any book. That's my job. But it just infuriates me to no end that we have really just taken everything that's special about reading and made it into this mechanical, sanitized thing. And it's just not.
Yeah, it's like we've reduced it down into the technical aspects of how reading happens.
Right.
But in doing that and in understanding how reading happens, part of the problem is we take the purpose of reading away. And like you said, the joy is gone as well. And then you're left with, why am I doing this? And that it's evident that is not working well based on the statistics around how many adults never pick up a book again outside of the classroom.
That makes me so sad, right?
It makes me so sad.
Yeah.
It's like you're missing out on so much of life. And I don't know, there's something so special about reading. So I was determined when we started Anastasis, we were not going to do this like piecemeal thing where we reduced learning, any learning, but reading as well, down to, we're going to teach you the skill in isolation.
Right.
Because to me, without context, the skill doesn't matter.
Well, and we can say that pretty much about everything in the way that we do things in Anastasis. Learning any skill or concept in isolation without context into other content areas. For example, science without math often doesn't make sense. Reading without science doesn't often make sense. Again, they all overlap so beautifully. And that's what's like so glorious about having an inquiry-based model school where kids get to see, I remember when I was a music teacher in an elementary school before, and I was teaching a song. It was in Italian and it was about a butterfly. And so first we translated the words into English so we could understand what we were singing about. And then there was something about the stages of the metamorphosis for a butterfly. So we started talking about that. And I remember drawing the life cycle on the board, and kids were like, "Hey, I thought this was music class, not science." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I just thought it was a learning class." And from then on, the kids always said, "Well, it's not just music, it's a learning class." And I feel like that's what Anastasis is. It's not just, we're going to do reading now and we're going to do math later and then science and then history. It's all kind of this beautiful mixture of how people actually learn. So there is context, there's understanding. And as kids are experiencing things for the first time, they get these nice little building blocks that fit together in multiple areas. And reading is a huge part of that.
And reading instruction at Anastasis wasn't kind of relegated to one time of the day.
Right.
It was like it happened all day long because the nature of inquiry is it's all happening all day long.
Right.
And so though we might have had set aside times for, group reads or class reads or individual reads, we also were teaching reading all day long.
Right.
So it wasn't an hour and a half in the morning, something that, it wasn't just this kind of set apart time. It was everything we're doing is reading, is comprehension, is on and on and on.
Well, and it helps kids understand too that there are different ways and modes of reading. Like right now I'm reading for understanding. Right now I'm skimming because I'm looking for a specific word. Other times maybe I'm trying to find something that helps me justify an opinion I have. I mean, again, all of these different things that we'll do as a reader, you can do that all day long rather than try to focus. Because if you only try to do that during a 45-minute time period every day for a whole school year, you would never be able to help every single kid get through what they're expected to know at a specific grade level or age. So when that is interspersed throughout the different types of learning all day long, you can work on how do you know that this is a reliable source and that what you're reading is factual. Those are all skills I can be doing during anything, not just a specified time for reading.
What would you say to people who say that's all well and fine if they have some reading skills when they're early or non-readers? How do you develop that as part of within inquiry?
Well, as you know, I've taught almost every level at Anastasis,
You
right?
did.
And with the littles, I remember some kids coming in at 5 and 6 with this already a little panic because I can't read. Right. They would say, "I can't read." And so that's when I started with that wonderful Sesame Street video, The Power of Yet.
The Power of Yet. And
I would say, "Oh, you can't read yet?" And then I would put a question mark there and I could write that on the board. So first of all, it was addressing each kid's individual needs. and making sure that I had a relationship full of trust, that I'm like, oh, it's okay that you're not reading yet. We're going to learn how to do that. And maybe by the end of the school year, you'll be a better reader than you are right now. So helping them to see that there weren't these set in stone dates by which they needed to be able to read or
and
take
that
a
something
test.
was wrong if they didn't. Yeah,
exactly. And also reassuring families to say, hey, you know what? We do not expect your 5-year-old to be a perfect reader at the end of the school year. We hope that they're going to make strides. We're always moving kids forward. So we want them to be able to be at a different place at the end of the year than they were at the beginning of the year. Yes. But there are no boundaries on that at this point. So my classroom was text rich. I had words everywhere. Every time we had anything that was large group, anything that I would say, anything important, we would start writing words down. We looked for patterns in words. Yeah. The kids created their own kind of anchor charts. So we would if we were talking about consonant blends, for example, CH, SH, and TH were some consonant blends that I noticed that they were having troubles with. And I said, oh, what can we do to help us remember? So they took pictures of themselves or they drew pictures and then they put the appropriate consonant blend next to it. And I was like, oh, this is great. So we'd hang those in the room. When we didn't need those anymore, we took them down and new ones went up. So it was just a really good way to involve kids in their learning, but also addressing specific needs for specific kids.
Yeah. And with some of that word work, even, whatever that skill that you're wanting the kids, making them word detectives, that as they're doing their silent reads, they'd come up and say, look, I found another SH word, to add to the word wall or to whatever. And they started to look at the text more carefully, even those littles, that they were really not reading independently the books that they had during silent reading time where you let them choose anything, but they were taking those skills that happened throughout the day, whatever was on those anchor charts, whatever the discussion was, and they would start to become those detectives looking for those patterns, and coming to point them out to whoever was in the room, really.
Right.
Well, and but whoever was in the room.
It was and they wanted to share. It was it was super exciting, right?
Can we put it on the wall? They wanted
it needs to go on the wall. The weird word wall, we had that. Anytime there was a word that we'd look as we were reading it or writing, because I can't talk about reading without writing, they go hand in hand. Anytime we found a word that they considered weird, even the word weird, we would put that up on the wall because it didn't fit into what we were learning with the patterns. So if it was a pattern breaker or a rule breaker, we had that on. And the kids, again, put those up there. Every once in a while, I'd find one and then say, oh, what about this one? And they put it on the wall. But I think what all of it breaks down into is that we had a lot of choice. There wasn't, I didn't insist kids read from leveled readers. They could level up, but that didn't necessarily mean it was a leveled reader. And I think that's important. Yes.
I think that's a good distinction.
Pernille Ripp, and I cannot remember the person that she quoted, but there's reading ladders where you start kids in with books that they are comfortable with and that they can be successful with, and then as you get them hooked on those specific types of books, then you continue to add complexity and giving them more and more challenge as they are going on in their reading. But I think that's important too from a very young age, is that they have a variety of books to choose from, that they're interested, they're making a lot of choice. Knowing those kids, we've talked about this in previous episodes, knowing your students well enough to be able to say, hey, there's this book I just found. I bet you're going to love this. Or I think you might like this. What do you think? And giving them those options. So you've got littles who come in and they're excited about reading. We did a read aloud multiple times a day. I think it's extremely important for the teachers to model how to read aloud, even if I don't always have kids reading aloud to a group. Some kids love to do that. Some kids do not. I read aloud every single day. And then again, followed up with writing things on the board, giving them options to look at. even when they said, I don't know how to read, they could find things on the board because they started to recognize the patterns and they started to recognize words. So we didn't drill sight words or things like that all the time, but because they were constantly surrounded by it, they started recognizing, oh yeah, I know that word.
Well, and you and all of our teachers really were so good as we're reading. What do you notice? What do you wonder? Right? There's all these pieces that were built into the comprehension, to how we're understanding place or theme or setting. All of these characters, all of it was happening in context during those read aloud times, during
what do you think's going to
reads
happen next,
or the group reads or the partner reads. So all of it was really tied together and in such beautiful ways. But again, all contextual.
It is. And when there are a lot of kids who, during longer read alouds, their minds kind of wander. So we would give them options to draw and or write down words that they heard, or make a character study. Again, depending on the age level of the kids, you can increase the complexity there. But that was something. Draw. When you hear me describing where Meg Murray in A Wrinkle in Time is living, why don't you draw what I'm describing? And then kids are starting to think about setting in a different way. They were comparing each other's drawings. So, oh, I didn't see it that way. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And just to talk about how anything that you read and how your imagination plays into that, into like a picture in your mind, and how can that translate onto paper. It helps me also to see if there were any disconnects. Is there someone missing something that I'm saying aloud? Sometimes I would have them build settings. Either with Legos or paper. We did one
Minecraft
year,
even.
Yep. One year we did Minecraft.
Odyssey. The older kids did the Odyssey, and they built it in Minecraft, which was so fun.
My littles did that too. They just had some very age appropriate books that would say, okay, go build this in and take me on a tour through this book, but you're going to build it in Minecraft. And one was on chickens on a farm, and one was, I think it was a witch or something. I don't remember all of them now, but it was really fun because, again, I got to see what are they really comprehending about the plot in this little story, and are they able to get some descriptive things in what they're building to show me and explain to me what they understand about the book. And that, again, gave me loads more information about what they understood compared to just, either having a book talk
filling
with
in
me
the bubble.
or a worksheet. Right.
Yep. And a lot of times more in the early days, I don't remember seeing as much in later years or more recent years. The kids would do book talks where they'd record themselves talking about a book and reviewing it and rating it. One of our teachers had, for their silent reads, they would make up their own book review template. And so she put no parameters around it. You can put, stars on it. You can put whatever you want, however you want to talk about the book. Just so we had a place that it was recorded that you've read it. And that became part of the storyline probably at the end of the year as well. But I loved it because the kids put what was important to them as they were reading. And they made this, I'm going to, for lack of a better term, say book report template. And that's the template they filled out for themselves. And they were so proud when they got to come into the office and make copies of their, I read another book, I need another copy. But they would come back and show me, how they rated it and why they scored it. And they tell me all about it. That process of them owning that whole thing was so wonderful because they were excited to share about what they were reading.
We were able to do that with book trailers. Kids would make like a movie trailer, but for a book.
Yes.
They would design a book cover. They would blog about books that they had read and then comment on each other's. We partnered with classes from other schools around the world and shared information about what we were reading and what we loved about it. sometimes we did, we would illustrate a picture book. I know I did this with the littles, and we did a Skype, or I'm sure it was Skype at the time, a Skype call with a school in Canada, and they read theirs to us, and then we read ours to them. And it was a really great way to see that, how the kids kind of got involved, and how they re-illustrated the story. It wasn't supposed to be a copy. It was so interesting to see how kids might, because I think every kid had a couple pages or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to see how they were envisioning the scene in their head if it couldn't be what was in the picture book. So it was pretty challenging in that too. But I think back through all the different ways, and we keep going back to choice and, relationships, and making sure that we're meeting an individual's needs, that it's not that cookie cutter, one size fit all curriculum, because that's not how kids learn to read. And they're all going at different paces, and honoring where those kids are has to take the priority. It has to be the priority over everything else.
And I love we even built some socialization, some social constructs around that reading, learning. I'm remembering upstairs several years, we had that graffiti wall in the coffee shop where the kids would just go and they could write quotes from the book, or they could review it on the graffiti wall. And then we had a basket underneath where they'd put the book. So the next kids, could go and pick it out and read. And it created almost this like viral type of feel for reading. Right. The kids got so excited. Anytime we did silent reading, it didn't matter almost which room you were in. They'd be like, oh, it's over already. Can we have more time? Because it was something that they were enjoying. It was things that they talked about with each other. It wasn't just, do the assignment or you're reading for the teacher. It was reading for its own pleasure. It was reading to learn. It was reading to connect with friends. So there were all these kind of social components, I think, that we built in over the years that really ignited an entire community that enjoyed reading.
For sure. It was an expectation, and just how we do things, that we had whether we called it reading rest time or silent reading or whatever, every teacher would call it something a little bit different sometimes, but the whole school was doing it, and we knew that. And I will say, as a teacher, there were often times when I was very tempted just to sit and work on email or make sure I had something set up for the next, the next unit after reading. But it was really important for kids to see me reading also. And how the times when it was the most successful is when we were the entire school, we knew that we were either camping out in a room and giving kids the option of sitting at a desk to read, because that's what some kids like to do, or having a really cozy spot. And I feel like I always had classes where I had those kids who liked to just like scurry underneath a table and get into the tiniest spot. And I feel like that,
and so dark sometimes. You're like, how are you reading?
But they just wanted to like be kind of cuddled up into this little tiny spot. And that was where they loved to read. So giving kids options to move around and be in a place that is comfortable for them. And then, okay, you're expected to be reading a certain amount of time. And for the younger kids, making sure that they took more than one book, because getting up, 20 times to exchange books got to be very distracting.
Could be distracting,
right?
Yeah.
So go get a pile of books, take it to your spot, stay there. And the time that we gave for the littles compared to the older kids sometimes was a little bit shorter. Sometimes it combined with, I think your eyes need a rest. That's okay to do too.
Yeah.
But
the other thing I loved, sorry to interrupt
you.
It's okay. Was the kids knew we didn't have the most amazing library at Anastasis. We developed a library over years. We didn't have amazing classroom libraries, especially to start. We had some, but not the richness that you would hope is in a classroom. Right. But one of the things that we did was, we took the kids to the library a lot.
Right.
In the early days, before we had hardly any books for inquiry or really anything, we would really use our library and they have amazing children's section there, and they have amazing children's librarians, and you'd give them a topic and tell them how many nonfiction, how many fiction, how, all the different types. They would go and gather a complete collection of 60 books that you can, bring into your classroom, and suddenly the kids have a whole new selection of books.
Right.
So I just want people to hear that if you don't have an amazing classroom library, maybe you just don't have that access. Maybe you're a new teacher. Maybe your school doesn't have the funding to have an amazing library. That was one way that we did it, using the public libraries, that I felt like was really successful. And the other thing I loved about that, the kids knew if they came to me and said, I can't find a book I like, I'd start asking them questions, and then we'd go on to Amazon and get one together. So we did everything just in time. And I think that was actually really important, that the kids knew that they could come and say, I'm interested in this, or I just finished this book and there's another in the series. And they knew we would purchase it and add it to our library.
Right. And when you aren't buying your own curriculum, that's that you're locked into, and curriculum is expensive.
It's so expensive. I've been on those committees, and it was like jaw dropping.
Right?
Yeah.
When you take that out of the equation, there is more purchase power to buy books that that kids are really interested in, or transport them to a local library. And thank goodness for public libraries. As a kid,
to fund them well, because they are so important.
As a kid, I spent so much time in the public library, in our public library, and then taking kids. It's like going to the library. Was one of their favorite field trips. They were so excited. They all
have their own library cards.
Right. And we would get them.
And so
if they didn't have them, we would make sure that they would get their own library cards. In some cases, we would get them different library cards from different counties, because sometimes we'd go to different county libraries. And getting the kids there, most of the libraries would loan teachers in excess of what you're like. If you could check out 10 books as a patron, teachers can check out more than that. So
I think 60 is our limit.
Something like that. Yeah.
At the Highlands Range.
Which is a lot of books.
It's a lot of books. And they'll also let you keep them longer.
Yes. I could always renew them.
Out time.
Yeah. So that's a resource that any school can use. It's not just,
they also have class reads. I can't remember if we said that in a previous episode, but they'll have whole sets that you can have a group read with. Everybody has a book. So check we always check the library before we would purchase a class set of anything, because if the library had it, it was like, well, let's go there. Let's use that.
And the interlibrary loan, that's one of the things I remember, a kid would be like, wait, the book's not here. I'm like, well, we can ask the librarian to get it from the other library. Really? We don't have to go all the way downtown for that? Nope. That's how that interlibrary loan works. And they're like, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about, how as a new teacher, I just didn't have an amazing classroom library, because you just don't when you're starting out. And we certainly didn't. And it's just such a brilliant use if you know that you have that available. Right. And two, like I said, the just-in-time books are brilliant, because you're not purchasing in hopes that kids are going to read something. They're selecting it with you, excited when it comes. They're like, my book came, they're all into it. And then everybody else wants to read it because they're talking about this book that Mrs. Tenkely bought, or whoever ordered for them. And I think there was something to that also lent itself to that social nature of how our kids thought about reading.
Right. Well, and we use the social thing like by speed booking. So we talked about speed friending in a previous episode. A lot of my classes would do speed booking. So I would just say, okay, let's get a stack of books either from the library or from that we had in the classroom. And everyone's going to grab one, and you're going to read a couple of pages, no more than 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. And then you're going to pass it along to the next person. And it was one of those, am I interested in this when I read the first few pages? Is it something I want to come back to? And it's okay if you say, nah, this one's not for me. or yes, this one is definitely for me. And they had like a little form that they could check off and say, yes, I want to come back and read this book.
And they could remember. Yeah,
absolutely. And it gave them this really great, like anticipation of, I get to read this book soon. And a lot of them, wanted to read the same book. And some of them had like, oh, nobody else wants to read this one, but I really do. And so it's really fitting that need of, this one speaks to me personally. We talked a lot about how as an adult, if you are reading a book that just does not speak to you at all, it's okay to close that book and not read it.
It is so hard for me to do that.
Me too.
And I just in the last year starting to do that because I'm like, there's too many good books out there for me to
it also
waste my precious time.
Exactly. And it's an unrealistic expectation that every book is going to be the book for you, or that there is something about it that you must finish a book because that's what you do with them. And that's not a healthy way of looking at reading either. So helping kids to see, this might not be the book for me. If it's something that the teacher is asking you, you know what, there's some that we're all reading this as a class read. There's something that we will have in common. And there's a reason I chose this particular book. But again, that's down to me as a teacher, as curating something that I know is going to be able to not only teach kids some skills that I want them to learn, but also speak to them all in a way that maybe they wouldn't know if they just found it by themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about how much common language at Anastasis came from the books that we were reading.
Yeah.
That whatever that class read was, you know, suddenly we had this whole new vocabulary for communicating with each other, and we all had this common reference point. So I think that those class reads are important. I don't know. I see some teachers moving away from class reads, and I'm like, I don't know if that's a good idea. I understand the desire to give kids the ability to choose their own book, but there is something to that shared common language, the shared viewpoint that you can reference back and back and back.
Well, and making sure that you're reading a book, not just because it's been deemed a classic. I think that that's really hard. And it's a pretty touchy issue in reading right now across lots of schools, but kids should be able to see themselves and other people in their books. And if it's only speaking to a specific demographic of people, then that's not a great book.
So often it's just the mirror, right?
Yeah.
It's all mirror and not window.
And no windows and no doors. So how do you help kids see that there might be a specific need to read a class read together, but find something that maybe is from a newer author that is a genuinely interesting book. I mean, that's hard, right? But there's so many out there. I think I struggle sometimes with how much I want to fire hose all of the books, right? Because there's so many good books out there, and especially in children's literature and young adult literature. I think that there are a lot of teachers who discount graphic novels. And I think that's a mistake because
and picture books, unfortunately, at higher, as soon as you can read a chapter book, it's like, well, now we put away those baby picture books, and those picture books can be so profound. In fact, we read picture books to every single age at Anastasis all the time.
All the time.
Whether that be in metanoia or in class or whatever, because there's such profound messages in some of those picture books, the way that they can say it with so few words, there's something so beautiful about a picture book that's well done.
How it speaks to kids at different ages and experiences also, right? So that, a 5-year-old might be understanding on the surface level what that book means, but the older, and that, it's about, sharing your emotions with each other and counting on your friends, where the older kids are starting to look at that at a much deeper level and going, oh yeah, I guess I do that. I always think back to The Rhino Who Swallowed a Storm, and that's by LeVar Burton. And my class got to preview that book and write a review before it was released to the general public. And so connecting with authors, and let me tell you, listeners.
And John Spencer's book. I remember when you read that with your class and how excited the kids were.
if you are able to connect with an author, and more of them will do this than you think. If you've never connected with an author before, just reach out, because most of them are like, yes, please. And maybe they can't, be there for a tour, but they'll communicate with your kids via social media or through emails or a phone call. And it's so special when kids get to, wow. I'm like, we were all excited about LeVar Burton, but our kids didn't know who he was.
Yeah, we were very excited.
Out of our minds.
Out of our minds excited.
Like bragging to everybody who had listened. But that's something, again, that's introducing a generation of kids to something that's very new to them, but something that's very special to a lot of us, right? They didn't know what Reading Rainbow was. And then there was a Reading Rainbow app. And they're like, oh, okay, now we get it. So just making connections to it's not just a name of a person who wrote up the book on the book, right? This is a living, breathing human being. And let's see what we can learn about the author and why might they have written a book about this specific thing, right? What's the topic that was their passion that got them interested in writing? So now you've got another level of interest that you can build with the kids about who's writing and why. And again, we said earlier that you can't look at reading in isolation, and reading and writing partner so well together. When you start talking about the motive behind writing something that's either a piece of fiction or something that's informational or something that's like technical writing, when you're giving steps of how to do something, now you're also translating and transporting those skills into writing, into reading as well. Well, why do you think the author wrote this book? And just asking all these questions, going back to that inquiry model, it's not me just, here's why this person did this. And I remember reading like the Scarlet Letter in high school. And if you didn't agree in my classroom, if you didn't agree with the teacher of why the certain imagery was being used, it was wrong.
Right. That was so detrimental.
Yeah. And I was like, but maybe what if I'm looking at it, the symbol here is something else because that's how it applies to me. That's what we're usually, it was such an interesting way of looking at reading and symbolism and imagery. When we bring it back down to our kids, we start asking questions rather than telling them. And when you're reading through a book and how it speaks to those kids, they're bringing part of their own experience into that. And it tells you a whole lot more about who that kid is.
It was always so neat to have when the junior high was doing a class read, they would take down different quotes that were meaningful. As they were reading, they'd stop and they'd capture a quote or whatever. And then they do fishbowl discussions or they do a Socratic seminar. It was always so fascinating to hear which quote stood out to them, which part stood out to them and why, and the connections they were making to other learning. And my favorite was there was always another connection to any other learning that was happening, because the nature of inquiry is it all connects. And so you'd hear kids bring in a topic that we had talked about in metanoia, or you would hear them bring in something that we had done in inquiry and oftentimes they didn't seem directly connected. So like we might be studying biodiversity and they're reading something and then they're reading a book and they're suddenly like, oh, the community that they were building was actually healthier with the biodiversity, and it was less healthy when it was all one, everybody was thinking the same way. And you're like, yes, of course. Like it just was so, all those light bulb moments that came with the way that they were reading and the way they were engaging reading, gave it meaning for them, gave it meaning for us. And they're starting to see, oh, it's all interconnected. There's no separation here.
It becomes personal, and that's learning is a personal thing. So no matter what you're learning, if you can't connect to that in a personal way, it's something that's going to, again, go surface level and then kind of off that cliff in the back of your head because it's not sticking. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion about making learning sticky.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a memory that I hang on to and retrieve it when it's necessary. When it's really sticky, I'm able to use that fact, that skill, that concept in a way that matters. I can use it. I can apply it. I can start evaluating, and then it's sticking around for me to then transfer on to something else. And again, we talk about building blocks in learning. It has to have that stickiness in order to progress. Yeah. So all of the different activities that we did in reading, like, again, we did not invent the wheel here. A lot of the things that we did with our kids, other teachers were doing too. We were fortunate enough to be in a very giving and sharing community of educators who were like, hey, yeah, we're in your network. Use this. Pernell Rip, Angela Stockman, a lot of people, John Spencer.
Both. I know,
all
they're
of these
so
people,
amazing.
Right?
And the learning that we were doing from, I don't even know if they know the impact they had on what we became.
Right.
And what we were doing. But it can't be understated. It can't be overstated, rather. What they did for us was so incredible.
Right. I remember Julia Torres came to Five Sigma, and she taught us a different way of bringing kids into a conversation based on something that we had read. And I think back to, we even visited her at her school is it called Montebello? Yeah. My brain is not on fire today. Little mashed potatoes.
Clearly, I'm having mashed potato brain as well.
But just, again, being able to learn from other people, and as a teacher, remembering that we don't have to have all the answers, and being able to say, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's try that and share it with our kids.
We were able to say, my friend did this.
Yes.
And we're borrowing this. We had this great idea from a friend of ours. They were hearing us also talk about ourselves as learners quite a bit.
And how we modeled that for the kids, then trickled down into how they approach things too. So if they saw me reading, then that was like, oh, Mrs. Baldwin is a reader. And then I would talk about myself as a reader, and we could share. There were a lot of times when you could do like a little mini biography, or we talked about during Detox Week, doing some things like all about me and what do the kids want to share. And a lot of them would bring in books, or they would write about books. To talk about, this has been my favorite book since I was really little. One year I just had kids design book covers to show what's your favorite picture book or any book. And we're going to put that up on our wall or on our hallway so that we can see that people know we're a community of readers here, and just making it something that we valued and cherished. I mean, that those are two different things, right? We value, we know that this is something that's important, but we also cherish the time to be considered a reader, and helping kids develop that as an attitude and a habit. We asked parents, please read to your kids at home, even if they're already reading. Yes,
we did not give homework at Anastasis, but one thing we did say to parents all the time is please read to your kids every single day.
Some of them would have this really nice little ritual at night before bedtime that they would go and they'd either read as a family or, again, I know that's a pretty big privilege there to have, time in your home to read. For others,
to books.
It might have been a big brother or sister, or one of the parents would go and read with the kids, and they would take turns reading pages, or and having conversations about the books that they were reading at home. And this is not to say if you're not doing that with your kids, you're a bad parent, because I get it. Time is precious when you're a parent, and there are a lot of things that have to happen at the end of the day. But it is very apparent which kids are read to and which kids are not. And I am not going to be one who blames a parent for anything, but the difference in kids who are read to versus the kids who are not, it's pretty significant. So if it's not an option for you, as a parent, there are a lot of ways that you can bring that into your home, whether it's through a device where someone is reading. I know, like Mrs. P.
Yes,
her story
they
time.
love Mrs. P.
So there are a lot of people who do these things through YouTube or on their own websites that you can find. You can get the same book that they're reading aloud, and then they will read with your kids if that's not something you're able to do.
Yeah.
We can find ways around the issues, right? But we absolutely have to have kids being read to every single day.
Yeah. And we valued that at school. We did that.
Right.
But yeah, it was pretty apparent when you have kids being read to daily, there's just the vocabulary is richer. All of it is pretty transformative when that can happen.
Well, and that's not just in their skills as a reader or their skills as a writer. It's their verbal skills, their receptive and expressive communication. That's a pretty huge thing. And I feel for families that really struggle with that. You can take the kids to a public library and they have story time with kids, especially with toddlers. There were sometimes when we couldn't go to the library for a field trip because they had a really big event.
Story time.
Exactly. So there are ways to work around that if that's not an option for you. But that's where you can ask your teachers, hey, this is something we struggle with. How can we get some help with this?
Yeah. When I was a teacher way back when I was teaching second grade, we had iPad Nanos. No, that is wrong. We had iPod Nanos. And I would record myself reading and send those home with the kids and the book who didn't have that access at home. And it worked well. We just got a grant and they were fairly inexpensive.
You can also do augmented reality, not AI, where you can put little stickers in a book at home and the kids can use a device that is like a recording of you reading that page to them or asking questions or talking about what was on that page too. One of my friends who did like she taught all day and then she also worked at night doing a lot of presentations and things for other teachers. And that was one of the ways that she was able to involve herself in reading with her kids, was using some kind of augmented reality and an app that helped the kids hear her voice, having a conversation with them too. So there's lots of ways to use technology if you're not sure how to do that.
Yeah. I also loved, we early days used rewordify.com a lot, which was when we had a lot of the articles that we would find for an inquiry block might reading level wise be so complex that it wasn't right for the kids in our classrooms. So we would use, it's just a copy paste and it would reword it based on whatever DRA level that you selected or Lexile level that you selected. And it was a really nice way to get everybody reading the same thing, but at a level that they were prepared to understand it at, so that they could have discussions around those articles or the pieces that they were interacting with.
There are other websites too, if you're talking about like nonfiction, like Newsella and others that will do the same thing, so that if you're doing something that's like,
they're just so dang expensive.
I know. That is true. There are a couple that you get a level for free and then others that are behind a paywall, which is unfortunate. But when you have, like if you're trying to work on current events and you do want kids reading about the same event, that's a really great tool to have. And especially if it's that they have a one-to-one device, then we aren't worried about who knows who's reading what level, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And our kids, I don't know that they would have known who was reading it. I mean, we never talked about levels,
right?
Or where they were at, or I don't know that they would have known. They obviously, if somebody was constantly volunteering to read out loud, they would say, oh, they're a really good reader. But we also talked a lot with kids about how being a really fluent out loud reader is not the same as being a good reader.
Right.
You can be a phenomenal reader and struggle with oral reading.
Right.
So we would talk a lot about just because you can read well out loud does not necessarily mean that somebody else who struggles with that's a skill I struggle with, doesn't mean that they're not a good reader. Those are different skills. And so we explicitly talk to kids about those different skills involved in reading. One of the things I hated when I was a student myself, hated is a strong word. I probably was thrilled at the time because I was in the high reading group, but I was very fluent out loud in my reading. And so my running records looked amazing, and I, had no miscues or whatever because I was very good at reading out loud. But I was so focused on the words that I was reading, I could not have told you anything about the reading. Mm-hmm. I couldn't have told you one, you ask any comprehension question and I have nothing. And so we told the kids, just because a skill for somebody looks this way doesn't necessarily mean that that's not your skill too. It just looks different,
right?
In how it gets translated.
I think reading fluency is, again, something that we hear a lot about in education circles and things that teachers will talk to parents about, but we're not always talking about the same thing. Because as you said, oral reading fluency is very different from reading fluency when you're not reading aloud, right? When you're reading to yourself, are you able to read at a pace that makes sense for you, that keeps you fluent in, I can read this sentence and I can go to the next line and the next line and the next line without getting interrupted. And I know what I've read and I understand what I've read. That is also, that's reading fluency. But as you said, and I think we've talked about this before, there are several memes out there that talk about the anxiety of reading aloud in class. And when they do like a choral reading example, you're not listening to who's reading. You are counting how many people are next before you, so you can figure out which paragraph it is you're going to read.
Which sentence or paragraph, yeah.
And then you're going to practice it, right? So you've completely... Choral reading does not help kids. If you're doing it as we're going to do a classroom play and we're going to read it chorally, or it's kind of like a table read that you do for a script, that if you're doing a play, things like that. That's one thing. But if you're doing popcorn reading or choral reading in a classroom to help assess kids, that's not doing anything that you want it to do. And I highly discourage that because it mostly puts kids into huge levels of anxiety if they don't consider themselves good oral readers. Yeah.
We didn't put that pressure on kids. We always told them, if you want to read, let me know.
Right.
And we would let them read, out loud with us. And it gave kids confidence to know that we weren't going to randomly call on them when they were not prepared to do that it got to be their choice and they got to kind of drive when and where that would happen. And
one of the things that I loved the most about how we did assessment at Anastasis is we had different levels, and it was part of our vernacular. This was common language, right? If I'm a novice, it's not because I'm stupid. It's because I don't have experience yet, or I haven't gained the skills yet, but I'll get there. If I'm a change maker, this is something I've had a lot of experience with, a lot of practice. It's not, you don't start on change maker because you're just a brilliant kid. It's something, this is something I've done before. So being able to share that kind of language with children and say, it's okay that you're not at the same level as the kid next to you. This person has more experience and more practice. So we're going to take you from where you are, and we're going to help you if you're just beginning. If you don't know how to read yet,
ways we're going to practice.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's kids will still compare themselves because that's just the nature of human beings, and they will still kind of wear that kind of with some shame. And I hate that that's what our society has done. If you're 8 years old and you are still struggling to read, people think that there's something wrong with you or that you're not smart or whatever. And helping kids to really step into, I'm just a novice and I'm getting there. I'm going to keep practicing. And the more I practice, the better I'm going to get. It isn't something that you're just, inherently born with. And I think we've done in school, because we've rewarded kids who come to school already having skills and knowledge, that we've rewarded them with really good grades. So it seems like they're smart rather, I don't like the word smart, to be honest with you, but it seems like they're smarter than everybody else, not because they actually are, but because what they came already having.
Yes. And I had parents who read to me all the time.
Same.
And that was lovely. I went to school having a lot of knowledge that came with me, just by nature of where I grew up. I will say that because I was an excellent oral reader, I got put in the high reading group in second grade, which I was very proud. And I knew that I was in the high reading group, and I was happy to tell anyone. But my comprehension was zero because I was still using pictures and other cues to understand what I was reading. And so when I got put in this high reading group in second grade, I've told this story, but we're reading Ralph S. Mouse, and I have no idea why we're reading a mouse, about a mouse and a motorcycle and what in the world is happening. I had no context, but I knew how to play the game because I knew if I volunteered to read out loud, the teacher wasn't going to ask my opinion about what was happening in the story. Right. Because that would go to somebody else. Right. And then if I listened to everybody else's answers, I could kind of piece together what was happening. I had no business being in that group, but it would have been shameful at that point to say, I don't really know what's happening, or I shouldn't be in this group, or this is too hard. So I just faked it.
Well, and again, you're talking about something that has been a practice that maybe isn't a great practice. When you are always grouping kids by ability and reading, then you're only ever with that group. And I love that we mixed up our groups a lot and had kids read to each other.
Even between classes.
Right.
We did that.
Book buddies.
At least once a month. Yeah.
Well, I think it also goes down to, there are some cognitive things that we could talk about when kids are learning to read. Visual processing is one. That is something that has always been a strength for me, even when I was very, very young. And I had a really good short-term and long-term memory. So reading for me was a piece of cake, and I was fast. I could finish a book very, very quickly compared to some of the other kids my age. That, again, doesn't mean that I'm off the charts, brilliant. It's a different thing that's happening inside my brain. So should I be rewarded for something that I already came to school with, and by contrast, somebody, oh, well, you're not reading as quickly as she is, so therefore you're in a lower group. What that does to kids' sense of self and shame, and they label themselves even if you don't. Right.
Yeah.
Right. It also creates that elitism a little bit, right? If you're constantly told, well, you're in the high group, it changes the way you feel about yourself as a learner. And I feel like that's something that we've done to kids in every area, not just reading. But if you want to talk about a lifelong skill, that's something that they absolutely have to be able to do. And I'm in serendipity, and I'm in treasures, and I'm in this. It's all of these weird little labels. The kids know, even if you give different names or colors or animals or whatever the curriculum companies do, the kids know. Yeah. So don't do that. It's not a good practice. You can help kids mix up in different ability groups or similar ability groups, but it doesn't have to stay the same. You can still challenge the kids who need to be challenged to go a little bit further, and you could, while still supporting those kids who are at that novice level. That's where my skill as a teacher has to be about the kids. And making sure I know their needs, and I'm not just saying, okay, well, it's really easy to divide your kids up into 3 groups. High, middle, and low, and keep them there for the whole year, because now my job as their teacher is just to grade what they do, rather than how do I help them?
Again, who's central there, right?
Exactly.
We have to ask ourselves who's central in these practices that we are pulling together.
Right. And how does that help kids grow? And again, what we look at as maybe a high level reader, maybe they're masking something that we're not seeing if we only put them in the same groups. If I'm constantly moving around my kids, I'm having them read to me, I'm having them read to others, we're talking about reading, I start to see things that, you are able to read very fluently and very quickly. Your comprehension, if it's something that is like, reading fantasy is always a really good clue here. If you're reading something that's fantasy that isn't based in reality, and you're struggling a little bit, that tells me more things than if you're just reading aloud and I know exactly that you've said every word perfectly.
There's so much to it. And I hate that as a society, we keep trying to get kids reading younger and younger and younger as if it's this badge. And developmentally, their brains are not ready to do that yet.
Right.
And so one of the things we tell parents all the time is, we're going to meet your kids where they are developmentally. And just because they're in a spot developmentally does not mean that's the spot everyone else is going to be in, and that's okay.
I think it's important to think about that, and also the results of what happens when you push a kid too hard too soon. And especially when it comes to reading and spelling. So if I watch people focus completely on the rules and they're always talking about how, oh, we're going to always know these sounds make this sound or these letters make this sound. And you're constantly focusing on that, especially with a kid who might be a little nervous about where they are right now, that they get this kind of anxiety around all the rules. And I watch it when they are starting to read to me and they're guessing at a word because they see the first 2 or 3 letters and then they're not looking at the rest of it, that they're so focused on a rule that they were taught that there's a little bit of regression. Like I've seen that happen with kids that I've had before. And then they went and someone focused really, really tightly on rules. And now they can't read what they were reading when they were younger, nor can they write and spell things that they were spelling when they were younger. And that's something that I see when in traditional schooling, a lot of times from kindergarten into first grade or first to second, depending on the reading expectations of the school, you'll see kids do pretty well in kindergarten. And then all of a sudden in first and second grade, they're starting to fall apart. And why is that? Oh, because we've just leveled up to a degree that those kids weren't ready for. And now we've put things in front of them. And it always comes back down to, remember this rule when you write these words. And then they get so hung up on the rules that they can forget, well, what do you already know how to do? Does this make sense with what you know how to do?
And we have had kids, we noticed a pattern that we would generally get kids in around 3rd, 4th grade. If they were going to transfer to Anastasis, that was about the time they transferred. And so often the story there was they seemed to be doing just fine, like you said, 1st grade, 2nd grade, still kind of hanging, started to struggle in 3rd grade, maybe with some reading. By 4th grade, you're not learning to read necessarily anymore. You're reading to learn. And so that's where it starts to fall apart because, again, we're so focused on those rules that we can't learn through our reading because we're so focused on the rules.
Right.
And doing it right and making sure that, like you said, when we've had kids who are have been diagnosed with dyslexia and all kinds of things who thrived with us, but it wasn't because we had all these reading intervention moments throughout, everything was a reading intervention really, but it wasn't that they were being pulled out and had sustained, reading intervention separately. And that's all we were focused on. It was really everything we were doing was reading intervention for that child, because as a teacher, you were paying attention to what do they need? Where is this falling apart? And really pinpointing how to help that. And sometimes it was a matter of getting rid of that anxiety that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So many times it was, if we can just let go of the anxiety and overcome that piece, it all suddenly clicked together.
Taking the pressure that the adults are putting on the kids away makes a huge difference. And I think
it's so hard as a parent. I know that parents, they so badly want their kids reading and want another, and they know it's an important skill. And so they, even when they don't necessarily want to, they put attention there, and it feels to kids like pressure.
I remember when my oldest daughter was in kindergarten and 1st grade, and I was an early reader. So I just expected she would be too, because she's my kid. Right. And kindergarten, she was at an appropriate level for kindergarten, but by 1st grade, she still wasn't reading independently. And I was so panicked. And I remember her sweet teacher, Mary Reddles, Mrs. Reddles, said, you know what? Don't worry about it. She's got this. And I was like, but what should I be doing? And I was like, again, young mom and really like panicky. And she said,
teacher.
And she's like, well, what are you doing at home? I said, well, we read. And she said, keep doing that, but she'll be fine. You don't need to worry about her. And of course she was. And then she ended up, majoring in English. So it's so funny that you like all of these things that are kind of panic attacks on the parent side, which again, I understand. Parents are always going to be worried that there's something wrong or that they've done something wrong. And I'm like, they've got this. It's okay. And the less pressure you put on those kids, the better. I think I want to talk a little bit about reading interventions because we do see a lot of situations in traditional model schools where kids are pulled out from other things to do reading intervention. And so now you're telling them, same. Oh, I don't think it's right. I mean, I know schools are doing this, and in some cases, those kids might need extra help. Or they absolutely do. I get it. But can you then look at how you're deprioritizing whatever it is that they're getting pulled from? Mm-hmm. So are you saying that art or music or PE or recess or whatever other thing the kids are doing, now some kids don't get to do that, and you've created a hierarchy that is unhealthy? Yeah. And again, I understand that some kids do need extra help. But maybe if we took the pressure of they have to have this done by this grade level off of them, then maybe they don't need the extra help. They just need more individual attention.
It's interesting, though, the schools that I have worked in, so much of the reading intervention was a computer program they were sat in front of. Which was sad to me. But
yikes.
The other piece of that is sometimes it's not that the reading can't come along. There's an underlying brain structure that is not built.
Yeah. And
so if you can't get that underlying brain structure squared away, and we partnered with the Nectar group to do that. But if there's not a cognitive ability to do that, and you just keep forcing more and more and more of the same thing, you're missing it. You're not right. Addressing the actual issue. Right. And what we saw is when that underlying problem got taken care of, suddenly the structure was there, the foundation was there, and they flourished in everything.
Right.
And yeah, it wasn't always, just more, they just need more skills. They just need more reading rules. They just need more time. They just need more. It was actually, they need to step away from that for a minute. Let's fix the underlying issue here. And then whether it's a processing speed issue or long short-term memory issue or visual processing, like whatever that piece was that was inhibiting them from being a reader, or anything else that was going on in school, sending your kid to Sylvan and Kumon and all these other places, tutoring places, and extra was not what they needed. And a lot of those reading intervention computer programs, the ones I've seen, don't acknowledge that something like that may be the reason why they're not reading well or comprehending or whatever it might be.
So pretty much everything that we'd said before, talking about kids with inexperience and they just need more practice, that is under the assumption that there hasn't been some kind of traumatic event in the brain. And a traumatic event can be an actual injury. It can be some damage caused by a virus. It can be trauma in
that dang virus.
Which, again, that can be
we saw a lot of.
We did.
Yeah.
It can be emotional trauma. There are lots of reasons, and we are not trauma experts, so we're not going to speak to that piece. But what we do know and what we've experienced is watching kids who one day knew all the words and the next day acted like I've never seen that word before.
I've never seen it before.
And I'm like, no, you read that word out loud yesterday and you wrote about it in your journal. I don't know that word. So that was an indication that there was something else going on that we needed to have looked at. And we're very fortunate in Colorado that the Children's Hospital up in Denver will do some testing, and most people's health insurance would cover that testing.
It takes so long to get in.
It does.
The unfortunate part. There's not enough access to it, it seems like.
Right. But when you have a kid who we called it like the leaky colander sometimes, right?
Yes.
Where they would hold on to information in what was considered a regular function of the brain. And then all of a sudden it's not there anymore. Mm-hmm. That's not something that you can drill and kill with a computer program, or even just additional practice on the same thing over and over again. There's something else going on. So that underlying problem is contributing to. And again, it just comes back down to, do I know my students well enough to be able to say, you did write about this yesterday and you don't know it today. There's a problem there. And then I can have a conversation with parents. Yeah.
Yep. And we saw that too with comprehension. Kids would be amazing, fluent readers. Mm-hmm. They could read well, but they would not comprehend. They couldn't paint the picture in their mind. Right. And so much of that came back to, their visual processing is so low that we need to work on that first before we can have an expectation of comprehension.
Right. Or logic and reasoning with older students, when you start to read and talk about thematic issues in a story, or looking to see how does this translate into meaning for us if we're reading something that was had a moral at the end of the story, and they couldn't connect it to anything. Again, that's when you know that there's an underlying problem.
Let's talk about some of the resources or tools that we used that we would go back to over the years that we just loved. The one that came to mind immediately for me is the book Reading, Writing, and Rising Up. And it's just so beautiful the way it matched kind of what we were doing with around social justice and work with nonprofits, and gave kids a bigger window. That was for older students that we used that one, and a lot of the exercises, but there was so much flexibility there that they fit right into the inquiry blocks. They weren't prescriptive kind of lessons or.
I liked that we could use, I'm not going to remember all the books right now because they're not in front of me.
Right.
There were some that would give you just, here's a way of tackling learning about theme in 20 different ways, right? And then you could also help kids meet their needs in different ways, because it wasn't just one prescriptive, here's the way you should do it, right? I want you guys to talk about the theme of this story, and you can do this in form of dance, or you can write a song, or you can make a short film, or, what else do you think you could do to create a project around this? So it wasn't just, write a report or have an oral report to the class. They had lots of different ways to think about it. And I remember some of the kids who told the theme of a story through dance. And I was like, this will be interesting to see how they do it. Or when the kids would create projects that were multimedia. So maybe there was a dance component, but also an art component and a song, and they all worked together on the same thematic unit. And what they ended up creating was really cool as they compiled it all together. Again, I couldn't even tell you who helped us with that idea. Do you
Amy
remember?
Berval and Dan Ryder, their book Intention, Rigorous Whimsy, gave us so many of those kind of ideas where it's let's think about this from different angles and from different viewpoints, and it's so creative. The ideas in that book I love, and they're endlessly remixable. It doesn't matter what you're teaching or how you're teaching it. It fits into every inquiry block. It fits into every topic. So those were always good ones. And then I was thinking about Jennifer Serrano's books, the reading strategies and writing strategies. Same thing. They're not curriculum that's prescriptive. It's very open-ended. You can say, this is what we're working on, and go to it. And it immediately gives you, 10 ways that you can enter that within any context with kids. Right.
And I know I use this quite a bit. I'm like a curator when it comes to, I said that word numerous times tonight, but when it comes to finding ideas for kids and teaching in new and different ways, or something that might appeal to a different set of kids, I'm just grateful that I have a network of other educators to go to. So
it's the best thing.
And I could borrow from this person and mix it with my own ideas, or talk with the teacher to say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. It could have been a teacher in our building, or it could have been someone in another country, who knows?
And it just brilliant the way it sparks something
Right.
in you that you're like, oh, we're working on this and that could work
Right.
here.
But there are a lot of teachers who also don't like that, especially if you're younger and less experienced. I shouldn't say especially if you're younger, because that's not always true. If you don't feel confident to kind of go with the flow, if you'd like to have a little bit more structure, there are so many people out there willing to share and for free. I'm not a huge pay teachers fan, because I feel like there's a lot of
Low level.
Yeah. Thank you. I was looking for a good diplomatic term there. It's not bad. It's just, again, very low level. Maybe you look through it for ideas.
It didn't fit what we were doing at Anastasis.
No.
It was often too
a lot of cute worksheets.
Cutie. Yeah. Cute.
Right.
And not high enough thinking that we were kind of trying to do with our kids. Yeah.
And that's what I will definitely say about reading, and is that there are so many resources available. If you find yourself resorting to what is essentially a worksheet, even if it's something on an iPad or a computer, it's still essentially a worksheet. You can go deeper than that. There are lots of different ways that you can get your kids interested in creating a project. Give them the reins and let them go for it. Tell me what you would do to explain to me the plot of this book. How would you do that in an interesting way? Let them figure it out. Yeah. Are they harder to grade? Sure. I mean,
good thing we didn't grade the way everybody else did.
But if there's something specific that you're looking for, it doesn't have to all look the same from every single kid. And again, you really start to see some kids just shine when they have options for a project with little to no constraint. Other kids need more guidelines. So that's where you can have some exemplars and say, okay, here's something that you could do for a book trailer. Here's what you could do if you wanted to. Exactly. Or go for it and you tell me what you'd like to do. Giving kids options and choice in how they read, what they read, and how they share what they've read. They'll always surprise you, because they will always go like you. I always got better results when I had less control of what I wanted them to do. And they always surprised me with what they came back with. Are some kids going to do the bare minimum? Sure. That's okay.
Absolutely.
Yep. If that's the minimum you've given them, sure.
Mm-hmm. I will also say, I was remembering Deb used them a lot. I had put together ideas based on around their multiple intelligence strengths of projects, kind of based on the multiple intelligence strength. So when they came and they were just at a loss of what to do, they just didn't know what was even possible yet.
Right.
We didn't have to use those in later years, because they would see each other's projects, and they were doing the same thing you and I did with our teaching network, where they would see something someone else did and they'd be, oh, it would be cool. Could I do this? And so they got more permissive and embraced that freedom more. But in the early days, when they struggled a little bit more, even having an idea of what was possible, because they had been in other schools at that point that told them what it should be. Right. And so a lot of them just didn't even have the concept of what they could do. And so we gave them kind of, well, look at what your multiple intelligence strength is. See if something under there looks interesting to you, and it would at least spark something.
We always kind of laughed at like projects that are old standbys, like a diorama, for example. Well, building the setting of a book in Minecraft is like a virtual diorama. But there were some parameters that I gave to the kids that they had to make sure they included, so I knew they understood what they read, etc. Same thing with book trailers, and any kind of, we want to role play. We want to pretend that we're these characters. Or I want to write a chapter about this book that might be the next, like the book ended, but here's a sequel, and I'm just going to start the sequel. So again, you're still getting the creativity component in there and something that might spark the interest for the kids, but I'm also knowing, okay, they really understood what happened, because that's where they took it. There are endless options, right? Your imagination is your limit. So help kids be able to do that. And when it comes down to assessing, we had levels of assessment to say, okay, well, maybe you were just a beginner and this is what you can do right now. And that's great. Maybe you're at this point where you know this book so well inside and out, you could teach it. Mm-hmm. How would you do that? So you have different levels of assessment as well. And what are you expecting? What's the expectation for each of the kids? How are they meeting the standards that you're assessing them on? And then where are they going to go with that? Because I know for a fact when parents would come in to see different projects that the kids did, they were always impressed with their kid.
Blown away. Yeah.
They'd come in like, wow, I didn't
How much of this did you do? And we're like, this wasn't us. Yeah.
Right. And if a kid, sometimes phones it in, there's still something to show. And maybe we don't know what that kid's going through right now. So what am I actually trying to assess? And what am I trying to get from that student to show me that they know what they're doing, that they are able to do and explain, and then leave it at that. That's okay. Not everything has to be this knock your socks off project. And Absolutely. You'll see that kind of ebb and flow throughout the school year for each student too.
Yeah, I agree. And it's seasonal almost, they'd do something amazing. And so you're like, oh, it's, they really got it. And then you would see, come January, February, the gas kind of lets up and it's not as impressive or it's not as thoughtful or it's not as whatever. And then they'd knock it out of the park again so even understanding kind of the rhythms of each of us, right? We can't all be on every second and doing the most amazing thing every second, and making allowances for that to be okay, helping the kids reflect enough about what they're doing that they can speak to that. I think is also important because as we were assessing, they were partnering with us in that assessment and able to say, yeah, I don't know. I just didn't have it. I wasn't motivated, or it didn't interest me like I thought it was going to, or I got started and I was really excited, but and how true of that is for any of us in any project we're tackling. Right.
I will say that one thing that I was against from the very beginning was any use of reward with reading. And we
we didn't do any reading logs or any.
No reading logs, because again, that makes reading a chore. If they're reading in the school every day, I don't need to see what they're doing a reading log at home. I hope that they're reading at home, but that's not, again, with no homework, that helps too, right? But one of the things that we'd see, sometimes we would use different apps for the kids to read, especially
Epic.
Epic, we love you. We love you, Epic, but the badges and things that kids got then changed the why am I reading and what am I reading for?
It completely changed the culture of those classrooms when they added it.
Yeah. And then they also
immediately,
the kids figured out if I just stay on a page a certain number of seconds and then turn it, and then I get to the end and it thinks I finished the book, and then I get a badge. And the more I do that, the more badges I get. And then I can tell everybody else how many badges I have. And this just completely ruined our entire culture around reading. So it then for me became, you only get to read on Epic when it is for a specific book that we don't have in the library. We're doing some kind of research or whatever. Or you can do that for every once in a while for your reading choice. But... And that was, again, I'm just adamant that rewards always put a carrot out there, and the incentive to get to that carrot changes.
Yes.
And why are we doing this? Am I doing it to get a badge? And there wasn't any ice cream party or pizza party.
No.
It's funny because the number of people who talk about how they wish that Pizza Hut still did the book challenge, or what was it called?
I did love Book It.
Yeah, Book It. I was too old for Book It, so it didn't. That came after.
I was reading anyway, so it wasn't like it was. Yeah, but kids would lie on that all the time.
Of course, because now there's something there's something out there dangling there in front of me that I'm like, oh, I want that, instead of why am I reading? What am I doing here?
Best of intentions, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Although I wonder if they brought that back for adults, if more adults would get back into reading.
I'd read for a personal pan pizza
free personal
every Friday.
Pan pizza?
Are you kidding me? Dr. Pepper and a free personal pan pizza. the best.
But to be serious again, it does change how kids view learning to read and learning about reading when a reward is put in there. And I know that sometimes it's like the number of books or the number of pages that you've read, and how that becomes like this status symbol. Sister and I are probably pretty good examples because I was a very, very fast reader, still am. And she is a very slow, methodical reader. And she became an English teacher. She's still a slow reader. Reading fast does not necessarily mean that you're a better reader. It goes back down to visual processing, which isn't always, if your processing speed is, there's nothing that's inhibiting you from doing the things that you need to do, you're fine. That's not necessarily an issue we need to address, but people have different processing speeds, and to compare that and say, well, you're not as good of a reader as this person is just because they're faster. It's the same thing with math. It's the same thing with anything. Right. So I looked at those when we would go to we did have summer reading challenges at our library when we were growing up, and I would win all the time because I could read a lot of books really quickly. And she kind of just gave up. She was like, well, I'm never going to beat her. So
why should I even bother?
And again, those rewards change your outlook on why am I doing the thing?
It gives it has a totally different purpose.
Right.
I wouldn't have believed how big of a difference that made until I watched it transform our community in a direction we didn't want to go.
Right.
When Epic changed and added that, it was like a switch was flipped.
I talked offline about Joe Bauer, the late Joe Bauer, and he wrote so much about the damage that rewards rewards do in school, and around learning, and just
he transformed my thinking a lot around that subject.
Same. Yeah, absolutely. And I keep thinking too about how many times like I would return to something that he wrote and explain to parents or other educators, here's what we've been doing for a very long time, and here's the outcome. And we've made a lot of kids feel really great because they get all the rewards, and we've made everybody else go, why should I even try? Because I'm not going to get the reward. So we keep dangling these prizes or stickers or, whatever it might be. It's not like leveling up. So I'll take karate or taekwondo or jujitsu. When you get a different level of belt, that's a different type of thing because it's signifying that I have achieved this level and I still have places to go. Right. Yes. That's a little different than, I just read, 10 pages and now I get the sticker. Or I get a lollipop or whatever it might, I get a piece of candy out of the treasure chest, Yeah. That's problematic, and we're changing people's motivation, children's motivation, and it's not a healthy way to do that.
Well, we heard about a school where they take a reading test every week. And if you ace the reading test, if you get 100% on the reading test at the end of the week, you get to break dress code. You don't have to wear the uniform and you can break dress code. And I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but can you imagine the shame of being the kid who still has to wear the uniform because now my score is public?
Right.
What?
Right.
I can think of the amount of shame and the amount of fear and anxiety you're putting in kids of, even if I would have been a kid who probably got to break dress code, but putting the fear that if I make a mistake, I'm going to be publicly shamed. Are you what are we doing here?
Right. And
what are we doing?
We've talked about in several episodes that shame-based approach to learning is very detrimental and actually does not help in any way, shape, or form. It does the exact opposite of what you're intending. So every time I know that there is a subset of folks who believe that we're too soft on kids and we want to make everything all warm and fuzzy. And I'm like, well, I would much rather be a person who is soft, and I help soft for kids to have a world that isn't always, at their face. But at the same time,
maybe we change the word from warm and fuzzy to loving.
Right.
How does
and
that
caring.
feel?
And I care about you as an individual and not just what skills you can perform. You're not like this trained monkey that I'm putting in front of me. I don't want you just to perform little tricks. My dog can do that. I care about you as a learner. And if reading is hard for you, I'm going to help you feel good about reading. I'm going to give you some skills that you maybe didn't have before. I'm going to teach you some things. But what I hope
we're going to celebrate every single win.
I hope that when you leave my classroom, you feel good about yourself as a reader, as a learner, because that then translates into more learning. And an individual who feels cared and loved wants to share that with the world too. There are very few people on our planet who feel cared and loved who are out there harming other people.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm taking like a huge left turn here, but I don't want to do that. But seriously, if you stop to think about how we treat kids in school and how we show them that they are cared for and honored. I know that there are a lot of schools of thought, like, we don't need to love every kid. Okay, fine. That's great. But they do need to know that they're being cared for. And if I feel cared for, I'm going to approach the world in a different way than if I feel that nobody loves me or nobody cares about me, and how important that is. Or
not valuable or worthy or enough, or fill in the blank. Yeah.
I have to matter to somebody, hopefully more than one person, but I have to matter to somebody to feel that there's something about me that's worthwhile. And if I feel that way, I approach the world in a much different way than if I'm not. So we can just concentrating on reading again, just by honoring who that kid is, where their interests lie, where their skills are now, and taking them forward. That is the one thing I can say. If you do nothing else in teaching reading, that's a huge first step.
Totally agree. Did we say it all?
Got a little philosophical there, but it's hard not to. I love
it. I mean, it's hard not to, because it all comes back down to that.
Right.
At the end of the day, it all comes back down to that.
And that is why I've said to anybody who will listen, I don't think I could ever teach at another school unless it was like Anastasis, because I know that not only am I cared for as someone on staff, but I know that all of the kids in our school are cared for also. And that is more important to me than anything. You can tell me that your school is so elite and you have the best grades and all your kids go off to Ivy Leagues, and I'll be like, I don't care. Do they feel cared about? Do they know who they are? Can they tell you who they are? And self-advocate in a way that says, okay, that kid's going to be okay. If they can do that, then I'm all in. But otherwise, the rest of it's, I'm not in for that.
And of course we want everything for all of the kids.
Of course.
We want them to be the best they can be. We want them to have every advantage. All of that is also true. But if it's not rooted in belonging and value, and knowing that they have worth, I don't know that the rest of it matters.
Not every kid is going to have the same path after they graduate high school. And I think we can honor that and say, you know what? Maybe 4-year college is not what this kid needs. And maybe that kid knows what he or she needs, and off they go.
And we've had kids do that
Absolutely.
Are doing brilliantly in life. Like we have the benefit of having years to have seen and stay connected to these kids and know we could have told you, when they were 9, that's not going to be their path.
Right.
And that's okay.
As long as they have options.
And it is okay.
Right? If they have the option to do the thing that they want to do, then that trajectory needs to be what they want, not what society wants from them. And that's what we want for kids.
Cool. I think we said it on this one.
I think we did.
What should we talk about next week?
Good question. What do you want to talk about? I mean, I'm always in for math, but you tell me, what do you want?
Let's talk math. We kind of touched on writing today. Let's talk about math, especially in the context of inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Onward. Hey, Michelle, where else can people find you online?
I blog at avenue4learning.com, and the 4 is the actual number 4, not the word 4. avenue4learning.com.
And you can find me at dreamsofeducation.wordpress.com, which is my original blog. You can also find me at ktsplace.com, which is where I share a bunch of resources and kind of projects that we're currently working on. And we are both on Blue Sky at the moment, but not as active as we once were on our favorite bird. Come find us and connect with us in other places, and we look forward to connecting with you.